Hey now, everybody. Welcome back. Brand new Take Aim podcast. Big deer and even bigger stories. And this week is no exception. We have Danny Calloway on. 3 giant bucks he killed out in Maryland. Maryland, for some of you guys, is not a state that you think of giant bucks, but I know there's some great bucks that come out of there. Danny, on the other hand, proves that year in and year out, man. He's such a beast. But this show, Danny covers 3 of the bucks he killed this season. Actually, 1 just died last night. Just killed this deer yesterday. And just thankful for Danny for being on the show and giving us all this information, man. There's so many good takeaways and so much to learn from Danny and just his process. It's truly unbelievable. But 2 bucks, that are just 6.5-year-old giants. One was Danny's biggest buck ever, bow buck ever. And the other deer is a 5.5-year-old that's just huge in its own right. So unbelievable story. Can't wait for you guys to hear it. It will be a part 1 and part 2, so make sure you check into both episodes to get all the details. It's unbelievable. But thanks so much, Danny, for being on the show. And Happy New Year, guys. 2021, set those goals. Get going on it. Deer season never ends. We'll see you guys again next week. All right, boys and girls, we are live. Brand new Take Aim podcast, and excited to kind of end the year on an awesome deer hunt, and that's always what we do here, big deer and big stories. And it's New Year's Eve, and super excited to have one of my longtime buddies, Danny Calloway, on the show today. And Danny, what's happening?
Hey, what's going on, man? Good to be on. This is my first podcast, so take it easy on me.
I'll try, man. I'll try. I'm sure you'll be fine, But Danny's just a remarkable bow hunter and deer hunter overall, and every year, I look forward to kind of chatting with him at ATA, and, sadly this year we won't see each other, but I always pay attention to Danny's season because Danny lives out in Maryland, and it's unbelievable the type of deer Danny kills year to year, and that is not based on anything else besides I know the effort and the amount of time Danny puts in, so I thought what a great way to end the year with a late season buck that he just killed, because I know it was, like always, Danny, I'm sure you put in a ton of work to kill this deer.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a year-round thing for me. It's there's really no off season when most guys are hanging up for the year. I'm pretty much geared up and pursuing. I never take a day off. I mean, my family, they spend summers, they go to the beach. I don't go. I've got food plots, cameras to run, deer to feed. It never ends.
No, it doesn't. You're right. The season never ends, that's for sure. But, man, you just killed an awesome buck. And, I mean, you killed an awesome buck earlier, and we can kind of touch on both those if you want, Danny. But take me through kind of, maybe the beginning of this year or maybe the previous history, whatever's easier for you, on the deer you killed this year, and we'll kind of start from there and get into it.
Yeah, no problem. Most deer that I kill, I usually have several years of a pretty good history with these deer. I started my year out same as I do. Like I said, it never ends, so I pretty much just keep rolling from year to year. These deer around here, this is an insanely highly pressured area. It's a lot of small pieces of property, so these deer get kind of bumped around from property to property. Really no solid, security for a deer to hang out around here. Whatever hunted, everything is hunted. But the season started out just like every year. You got a lot of bucks, great potential, a lot of really good velvet deer, and week or two before our season opener in September, it's just like you hit a light switch. Those deer, they disappear. Everything you planned the entire season kind of gets thrown out the window, and you're basically starting from scratch again. So to touch on, we're allowed two buck tags with archery equipment in Maryland. And you're allowed a bonus tag, which you can use either the muzzleloader season or the firearm season. So basically no more than 2 bucks with the bow, and then you can actually kill one more bonus deer during one of the firearm seasons, and I use a bow during those seasons. So it's 3 buck tags for me if I'm fortunate enough to get the third one during the gun season, which is exactly what happened with this deer. But early October, good buddy of mine called me up, Randy Hastings. He's got a bunch of really good properties. I had passed a lot of really, really good deer all summer. We just had a lot of solid 3-year-old deer, some good 4-year-old deer. We just, wanted to let them walk. And, it's a risk letting them walk because of the pressure and the hunters around us and, the size of our land. But my buddy called me up, and he told me he had a lot of deer on his place in this one farm, and went out for a evening sit in October, and he had a buck that he called the crooked-faced deer. And it was a 10-pointer, about 22 inches wide. He had a smashed-up face, and his nose was kind of crooked and on the side of his face. And he's had probably a good 3-year history with that deer. And I told him, I said, he had some great deer on his farm. I mean, they were absolute giants on this place. But that was the deer I wanted. I'm a junkie for an old, mature buck. I don't care if he's 120 inches or if he's 160 inches. If he's 6 or older, man, that's the deer I want. I don't know. I got a sickness for him. I guess it's just the challenge of killing that older deer that's seen and been around. But anyhow, back to that hunt. Called me up that evening. We went out and we sat on his field, and I passed several, 130, 140-inch deer coming out to his food plot. And this deer comes out, of course, last 30, 40 minutes of light, makes his way across the food plot. And I end up shooting a deer on film at probably 25 yards. And just a really old, mature, I think Randy pretty much thought the deer was 7 or 8 years old. And just a really unique deer with that smashed nose and that crooked face. And I was tickled to go hunt and shoot that deer because, all my spots pretty much had basically just dried up with mature deer. People talk about the October lull. Well, I'm not a huge believer in it, but, they do tend to not move as much. But, that was pretty much the story of my first deer of the season.
And Danny, what did you guys come up with about his nose? It is really crooked if you guys see the photos, which I'll post in the media art. But, man, obviously it was broke at some point, but, man, it's a mess. What a unique deer, but it makes him awesome because of that. But poor thing, man, he probably couldn't breathe.
I tell you, he didn't have any problem eating. He was probably one of the heaviest body deer that I think I've ever took. We don't know. Now the farm is literally butts up to a 2-lane highway. I shot him literally 150 yards off of a major 2-lane. Maybe he got cracked by a car when he was young. That's our best guess. Maybe right. It's some kind of genetic deformality that occurred sometime in, I have a deer at my property on my home place that looks identical to this deer, but he's just a 1.5-year-old buck. So it could be something that, I'm not aware of, that, I'm not disease
sure.
Isn't really the word I'm looking for, but the fact that.
I get you. Yeah, it could be a birth defect.
Right.
You know what I mean? It could have been, an accident, like he broke his nose coming out of the birthing canal. Who knows? But just how crazy. But
he was unique.
Get back to what you said though. Super huge body, and I'm with you on the maturity of deer. I don't care if they score 120 if he's 5 or 6 years old. I think that's such a trophy, and I think it's such a. It means nothing more to me, 120 or 180 when he's 5 or 6 years old. I just think they're awesome deer either way, and I'm with you 100% on that.
Yeah, I've shot deer and people have been like, what'd you shoot that deer for, man? You kill big bucks. I'm like, that's a big buck. I'm like, this guy is, he's 7, 8 years old and the deer wouldn't score 110 inches.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
History has a lot to do with, a lot of these deer too. And you kind of get to know deer. And it's almost as there's a disconnect when you actually kill it. You're just like, oh man, I'm not going to get any more pictures of this guy.
Yeah, I know. It's a sad disconnect, really, to be honest.
Yeah,
so, before we move on, Danny, what did recapping that, just what you had learned from him, real quick? Was it throughout the summer? Did you guys have a good pattern? Was it a certain food plot? I mean, what overall gave you the game plan that you thought that day you were going to kill that deer?
So this guy that I was hunting with, he's, I run cameras with him and I help him on his farms. I hang stands with him. He has one of his legs had to be amputated. He's running a prosthetic leg now, and it's really hard for him to get things done. And so I give him a big hand on these places. So I got a lot of history and I'm familiar with his farm. Yeah, he is a farmer, and he is one of the rarest farmers there's guys that are farmers and there's guys that hunt, and then there's farmers that hunt, and then there's this guy, because he will literally plant his entire field, and he will not harvest it. He'll harvest a strip or two out of it. He plants soybeans, corn, brassicas, clover, and, barrier cover against the highway, and he would have 40, 50 deer in this field at evening, and the field's only 16 acres, the field I was hunting. And this guy will not get a crop damage permit. He will not shoot a deer, and he has giant bucks every year. And his field, he can cut it at the end of the year. Sometimes he has to. There's so much grain still in that 16 acres. And I'm talking this place gets pounded, but he has other food plots on his property that they also use. But
how big overall is that piece that you're talking about, Danny?
He's got he has 160 acres there, but there's only about probably 70 acres of it that's wooded.
Okay.
And probably 60 acres of it is huntable woodland area. So not a huge place by no means, but it's a thicket. It's a super, super dense cover. It's been cut over. He strategically cut the woods and left strips of hardwoods in it, with a lot of old growth oaks and stuff like that. So he farms for deer, but he's a farmer, man. But I tell you, I think he'd let his crop go wayside just to kill a big deer. But as far as this deer, 3 years history with this deer. This year was absolutely the best his rack had ever been, and he was always on our radar. But he was just one of those stealthy deer that you'd get a few pictures of him, and then he's gone, and you wouldn't see him all season. And in January, he would show back up. He'd come back to his home range, and he would stay there until he shed his antlers, and up until October the following season, when he would, be there that whole time, and he'd take off again and I guess head to wherever he chose for his breeding grounds. But just history with the deer. We knew that deer was using that field. There was 2 other food plots that were integrated into this block of woods, and he was never on any of those food plots. And some of them, one was about 250 yards away, and the other one was probably 150 yards away. Never a picture of that deer on any of these plots. And we knew he would come out of that north corner of that field like he had always done. He would stick to the cover and stay close to the woods, and he always comes down. And my buddy, here in Maryland, we're allowed to bait. So he always had a pile of corn in the corner of the field, and it seems like all those deer would come out, they'd eat that corn, and then they'd head out into the crop field. And that evening, pretty much that's what happened. He come out about 250 yards in front of me and beeline just straight down the field. Come in, got him a few bites of corn, and when he went to take off, that's when I let one rip. And he actually, when I shot him, he ran directly back down the field and went in the same trail that he came out of.
No kidding. Like right back to his bed.
Yeah, right where he knew he was, or thought he was going to be safe. And, it's just that's the instinct of those older, mature deer. A lot of deer, you shoot them, and they'll run out in the field 150 yards, get their bearings, and they'll haul off and run somewhere else if they don't die right then. And this deer he knew where he had to go, and that's where he headed for.
Now, that day in particular, Danny, was there anything special you remember? Was it something, weather-wise? Was it a high pressure? Was it a certain wind that you needed?
Yeah, it was a high pressure day. It was probably 10 degrees cooler than the previous days during that week, and we actually, I don't know if I'm allowed to throw or plug a product on here, but the wind was crap for the stand. I chose to climb into the stand, and the wind was absolutely crap. And a buddy of mine, Irv, has got a company. It's called Carbon Synergy, and it's like a carbon powder. And what you do is you can take this carbon powder and put it in like a tote and put 5 gallons of water and saturate your clothes and kind of work them around, take them out and line dry them. You can apply it dry, but it's messy. It's a black carbon powder. Or you can put it in a spray bottle and just mist it on your clothes when you get up in the stand. And I will tell you right now, I would bet my house that is hands down the best scent prevention product I've ever used in my life. If it weren't for that, I probably would have never killed that deer and many other deer on my wall. I really don't factor wind in anymore since I've started using this, because just like last night, I had probably 10 or 15 deer downwind of me all evening, and I knew the wind was wrong for the majority of the field, but I knew where that deer that I was hunting last night was going to come by. The wind was good for him. But yeah, back to that deer. I keep jumping around, but
that's all right.
That deer, you couldn't have asked for a worse wind. And I was actually supposed to hunt on the opposite end of the field where he comes out, but when I got there, you know what you're supposed to do, but you know what works in favor for the deer. So I always push the limits. I always say if I can get to where he knows he has the advantage and I can get away with it, which, like I said, I give all the credit to Carbon Synergy, to this product that I use, because I am 100% bulletproof. Unless I go out there with a nasty, rotten onion breath or something, and I'm breathing in heavy all night long.
Right.
I am bulletproof. I am bulletproof up that tree, and I know it. And that's how I'm so confident when I do these things. But yeah, totally worst wind possible. And at one point there was 27 deer. I actually took a picture with my phone, and it was 3 shooter bucks out in front of me, and the wind was blowing right to them, and not one deer picked me off.
That's crazy. And so which way do you do the application, Danny?
So I've never been a dipper.
Personally.
I've never been a dipper. A lot of guys like to dip them. For years, I would take the product and I would literally just take the black powder and sprinkle it all over my clothes and pat it all in, and it would darken you up. And I mean, it's a mess. You look like you've been working a 12-hour shift in a coal mine. But I'm not out there to win a beauty pageant. I'm out there to kill big deer, so I don't care, if I get dirty or not. But in the past 2 years, what I've done is I've went to like Home Depot or Lowe's, and I've bought one of those spray bottles, the Zep bottles. I'm sure everybody's probably seen those.
Yeah.
And what you do is you get one of those spray bottles, and first thing you do is you unscrew it. You pop that screen off of the pickup straw, off that pickup tube, and then you take about a gallon. I do it heavy, and I put about a gallon's worth. There's marks on the side of this little carbon bottle. I take about a gallon's worth and put it in that 24-ounce spray bottle, and I shake it up. And I mean, it's the thickest, blackest, nastiest looking water you've ever seen in your life. And I'll put that sprayer on a fine mist, and when I get up in a tree, I spray if I have a jacket I'm wearing over whatever I walked in, I spray underneath, inside my jacket, outside, inside of my hat. I mist it on my face and around the back of my neck, arms. I mean, I basically have full body coverage. And 10, 15 minutes, you're bone dry. I don't care if there's not a puff of air. The stuff just dries. And I'm telling you right now, you are bulletproof. I cannot tell you the last time I've been busted. It's just.
That's pretty awesome, then.
What sold me was it was actually at ATA, and I'm walking by, and a buddy of mine who had killed a big deer was actually he killed 2 deer in over 180, and Irvin had invited him. Irvin had invited this guy to come and be in the booth and tell his story. And it was a little booth in the ATA, those little ones that most people don't look at.
Right.
And I'm walking by, and Irv and my buddy, he hollers. He's like, "Hey, man!" He's like, "Yeah, come over here." He's like, "This is my buddy Danny. He's a big buck killer. And they got talking to me, and they pull out. He's like, "All right, let me show you my product." And everybody's got their sales pitch, and I was just like, "Oh man, another one of these." And this guy pulls out a postcard, and he takes a Q-tip and he dips it in Scope mouthwash, and he took the Q-tip and he wrote. He put the letter D for Danny on this sheet of this little postcard. And he said, "Here, smell it." And I said, "I can smell it from here. It's scoped," and he goes, "Watch this." And he takes a little tiny bit of that carbon powder and sprinkles it on that paper. And he takes his finger and rubs it over that wet surface. And then the D is like standing out because it's now black. And he says, "Here, smell it now." And I had black stuff on my nose because I so wanted to smell it. I said, I want to smell the scope and just prove this guy wrong. And I had it all over my nose. I couldn't smell it. And that sold me on it. I mean, anything that would absorb that odor and trap it. And we talked for 45 minutes, and I held that card, and I would pick it up ever so often and smell it again. And it never came. That carbon absorbed all that and just trapped it, and it would not let that smell be released out of that paper. And he gave me a couple bottles, and man, I went straight to it. I got back, and I actually went and hunted a 100%. I hunted a bait pile on late season, had 7 bucks come in, wind blowing right over the corn pile. I'm testing it to the max, and I killed the biggest deer that we had on camera on that farm that evening.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy proof then. If you legitimately set out to prove it like that, that's crazy.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't get a dime from it. I'm a paying customer. I encourage people to try it because I don't want this guy to ever go out of business because I got a stock of. Oh my man, I got a stock of it in the house because that's always in the especially with today's world, you never know when something's gonna be booted out of the system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, sometimes they gobble them up and never do nothing with them, and bad stuff like that happens. For the user, I should say. Bad for the user, but. Yeah, that's pretty remarkable, man. That's cool. Very cool. That's a cool product to hear about and learn about, so thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no problem.
So, second deer now, I guess we'll get into, but that was like a November time frame. Is that right, Danny?
October 30th.
Oh, October 30th. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, so 2018, I bought a place where we built our house. It's a 15-acre piece. It's a goofy cut, 15 acres. I got a creek bottom that runs through it. I got a little oak hill. I have like the only white oaks in this entire area. Everything else has been timbered. It's all thicket and trash gum trees and stuff like that. But 2018, it was in January. I start getting pictures of this really good mainframe 10-point deer with split brows and almost like a third main beam coming out of his base. And obviously, to me, when I looked at it, I figured he was a 3-year-old deer. Deer stayed all throughout, I think until he shed his antlers and disappeared probably in, I'd say, mid to late March. never saw that deer all summer, had no clue where he went, if he'd survived or not. The following October, I get a picture of a deer. I did a lot of hinge cutting up on the hill, and I kind of did it for cover for deer, and I did it for the oaks were kind of getting choked out, because we have holly trees here that you can literally hang 2 sets up the same tree side by side. They are so big. I mean, they get as big as an oak tree. It's insane. Not as big as branched out, but I mean, you're talking a tree that's 20, 25 inches across up top where you're going to hang your stand. Just gigantic holly trees. And wow. I wanted to cut these hollies out because they were choking out all the mass crop trees that I really wanted to thrive. So I had felled one of those and hinge cut it so it would stay green. And every deer that come through that would come to the very end of that tree and walk around the end of it, and they started this big community scrape. So I put a camera on it, and it was in October of 2019 that this deer shows up, and as soon as I saw it, I knew it was him. I said, oh, there he is. He made it. He had turned into a mainframe 9, and he had the potential. You could see where he was starting to get some stickers, and he had a split brow on one side, which did make him a 10, and you could see he was getting some really gnarly stuff, but he'd lost a lot of that character that he had around his brow and bases. Had that deer daylight multiple times all season, solid 4-year-old buck. Anybody would have shot this deer. I fought the urge because it was not like a great year, and he was one of the better deer I had on camera. And I just said, I'm not going.
He's 4 at that time?
Yep, he's 4 at this point. 4. And I literally have 2 gun clubs behind me and neighbors on each side of me. And keep in mind, I got 15 acres here. And this is a deer that I've been feeding monster meal on my place out of this big platform feeder with a roof for years, and I keep it full year round for him. And this guy was he was one of those deer that when he come there, he would hit it. He didn't hit it in the summer months, but he would hit it. He wasn't here. He would go off somewhere else. So I got pictures of the deer, and I was like, that's him, but he looks familiar to me. So I got going back looking through pictures, and I usually know a deer better than if you showed me one of my kids' baby pictures. I would know the deer before I was like, oh, that's my kid. But I got looking at these pictures, and I said, man, that deer looks so familiar. Well, about 2 or 3 miles down the road, I had a camera, and it's a spot where these deer, a lot of bucks in the area, it's like their summer range, big crop fields, small blocks of timber, island out in the middle of these. And I got looking through the pictures, and sure enough, I had pictures of this deer all summer over on this farm, which was probably about as the crow flies. Yeah, it's probably 2 or 3 miles as the crow flies. So I figured out he was spending his entire summer over on this other farm, and then he would come back to my place, and that's where he would spend his fall and winter until spring came, and he'd go back, and the cycle would start over again. So, man, like I said, I stayed out of there. I tried to make my 15 acres his sanctuary. Hopefully, I know he was going off of it. I know other guys were probably getting pictures of him and seeing him, and if he could just survive, it's a risk, but it's a risk worth taking if it pays off. 9 times out of 10 you're going to lose that risk, but the one time it does pay off is the one time it makes it all worth it. But so this buck, he spends his entire fall there, into late winter. I'm getting pictures of him daylight every day, and I'm just like, man, he's got really good mass, good time length. I hope he makes it. Man, I hope this deer makes it. He's going to blow up next year. I'm expecting him to, my best guess is, he's 4 years old. So I'm just like, man, he's 5 years. That's when he's going to really pop, hopefully. And let's just hope he makes it. That deer stayed on my camera. I had him feeding on the feeder late, probably in February and March. And I think it was March 23rd. I didn't see him on camera anymore. And I noticed I didn't see him. He had a distinguishing throat patch. He had a light fading spot underneath of his throat patch. So I would know if I'd seen him at that feeder without antlers, if that was him. Plus, he was just one of the bigger deer. He just gone, disappeared. So I chalked it up. He's going back to his home range, and he's going to spend his summer back down there on the island of the field with the bachelor group of bucks every year. So we end up going to spring. I take my son for our youth turkey hunt. We call a gobbler in, and just this gigantic bird, probably the biggest bird we ever had on the place. Beard's dragging the ground, and I don't know what happened. My son is usually just as deadly as it can be. He loves the turkey hunt. And the bird's head and neck go behind a tree, and he shoots. I don't know if it was nerves or what, but he basically body shoots this bird at 35 yards. And the bird takes off running and flies, and he goes up into the trees, and you can hear him flapping through. So we give him about 15, 20 minutes, and I said, look, I told my son we got to have to sneak and look for this deer, or this turkey. And I said, we're just going to have to, you stay right here in front of me, be ready. If he gets up or something, you can get a shot at him, take a shot. So we're creeping down the edge of the thicket up on this big hardwood hill, and all of a sudden the bird takes off flying out of this big tree. Boop, 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 boop. You can hear him fly. He takes off. He looks fine to me. I said, buddy, I'm sorry. I was like, you shoot them in the body sometimes. You shoot a 20 gauge. I said, their feathers are like armor. And I said, let's go up here and just make sure there weren't no blood dripping out from under the tree he was sitting in. And we go up on this little hill. And as soon as we get to the top of this little hill where it drops down into the thicket, I look, and there's the 5-point side to this buck. And I was like, oh, man. I was like, this is a nice surprise. And I walked over and picked it up, and I was like, immediately I was like, I cannot believe, I know I did the right thing, but I cannot believe I passed this deer up all fall. He was way bigger than I thought he was.
No kidding.
And, I was so glad. I was so glad that just to have it shed antler. So I don't really scour my property shed season into the thicket area. I might take one walk in there, but I usually leave it alone because I don't want to blow the deer out of there. They just get so much pressure around here. They learn really fast, and they have a zero tolerance on pressure. So I kind of leave it to be there. But anyhow, this summer I go out. Summer of 2020, I put cameras out in the same area where he had summered years prior, and I don't get hardly a picture of any bucks. This is a spot that for the past 8 years, if you want to know what buck's going to be in the area that fall, you run a camera on this spot. And I run a camera there. I put corn out. I put a monster meal mineral block, and I would run pellets out there in moderation because we have a lot of moisture and we get some rain, and that's pellets. That's their worst enemy. So I don't like to let them get wet and rot, and it stinks it up the ground. So I would run pellets out there in moderation while. Kind of tying this into the deer I killed yesterday, I started getting pictures of this really old, mature buck with this crazy third main beam that came out and hooked up, just a giant body deer, really old, mature deer. And I was like, I like him. And, he had 2 or 3, 3-year-old bucks with him and a good 2.5-year-old buck with him, but that was it. So I'm trying what's changed here? So the property where I get these pictures, it's basically a finger of timber that runs off of the paved road. And at the back of this finger of timber is where I run these cameras. And there's usually a transition there. It's two different farmers have property there. So one year it's soybeans, one year it's corn. And every year it would rotate crops. So it would always be both crops available. And they meet right at the back of this wood. So you're kind of at a travel corridor, a transition point from year to year for these deer to travel. They can always travel down the corn to get to the beans no matter what side is which crop. So a gentleman 2 fields over had purchased a field that butted up to this island of timber where most of the deer came out of. I didn't know it at the time, but he had actually, when he purchased this field, he got about 40 or 50 yards of timber that went with it into that block of woods, and I had no idea it was cut up that way. He went in there and he started cutting trees down and cleared all the underbrush out of it. He's out there on the weekends shooting skeet, shooting into the woods. So all those deer that had spent their life coming out here to this place, now there's been a drastic change to the environment, and they're no longer using this area. They ended up moving, and from where, if you put my property as, let's just say, the center of the clock hands, this property was 2 miles, 2 o'clock of my property to the east. This group of bucks, including this buck that I had passed up and had all this history with, he was going about 2 miles in the opposite direction to the west to another bean field, the next closest bean field with seclusion. So I was doing a little summer stroll. I don't really do a lot of riding around in the summer and look for velvet bucks on other people's property. I wouldn't want them stopping and running mine in, so I don't really do it to theirs. But I'll take an evening ride and I'll look around, and I just happened to go by this field one day and I look and there's this buck out in the field and I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing's a giant. And I tried to get glasses on it, but I basically had to stop in front of somebody's house. I don't want anybody parking, stopping in front of my house, glassing behind my house. So
sure,
I just out of respect, I didn't do it. So I just looked at this deer from a couple hundred yards. I was like, man, that deer's got like splits and it looks like he's got a drop tine and he's got trash everywhere. I was like, man, I didn't get to identify the deer. He was in a bachelor group of about 7 or 8 bucks. So, we go into the season. I run cameras 365 days a year back here to my place. This deer, I'm just like, please, it's October. I've got 5 or 6 mature deer that are good mature bucks that I just don't want to pull the trigger on because I want to see if this deer is coming back. And I've already, used one of my bow tags, so this is my second bow tag. So if I scratch it on one of these deer and he shows up, I'm pretty much done unless I hunt him during a gun season. So I kind of put all my eggs in one basket, hoping that this deer was going to show up in October. And I think it was October the 14th, one of my neighbors messaged me, and he sends me a picture of this deer, and I'm just like, when he sent it to me, I was like, this thing is a giant. But I instantly knew when he sent the picture that it was that deer. And then I knew that is the deer that I'd seen 2 miles west of here this summer. And I said, that's him. He's come back. He's going to spend his fall here. It's game on. So I did everything just like I always do. I kind of stayed out of the place, let the cameras do the work for me. I run covert cellular cameras, so I get, my information is instantly fed to me. October 20th, he shows up about an hour and a half after dark. I had a bait pile in the woods, a corn pile where I feed the deer out of my feeder all year. But as the season progresses, when you get new bucks coming in, they've never seen this feeder before, so they're less likely to come and just throw their head in it. So I will bait on the ground about 40 yards away from it, and I will keep the feeder filled also. And he approached that corn pile. Now he fed on this corn pile in the same spot for 3 years this time of year. He would not come up to that corn pile. He stayed about 25 yards behind it in the edge of the brush. Never got really great pictures of him. He was always moving through or, turning away from the camera. I want to say it was
So, Danny, do you run more than one camera in that situation? If you're running the feeder and then you're drawing a line 25 to 40 yards away with some other feed, do you run multiple cameras to catch both kind of areas?
I will early and I will late, but during the mid-season when these bucks are moving, and a lot of the deer will tend to shy away from the feeder, and they will start eating on. So I usually just will put one camera on the pile that's just scattered on the ground.
Okay.
Now, like right now, I have a camera on both, and I'll get deer on one camera and not get them on the other. But now the feeder is hot. Like the feeder's hot from now till September the 20th, and then it dies out for those, 2.5 months.
Yep, makes sense.
They won't even hardly use it. At one point, I was running 3 cameras in there. I had 2 cellulars on trails. I had a cellular on the trail that I actually found his shed on, coming down off the hill. And I had several mature bucks on camera using that trail, big rubs, biggest rubs I'd seen on the property since I've had it. And not one picture was of him. So, cameras go cold for as far as his activity. And on the October the 29th, we had a storm roll through, and a cold front had come through. It was blowing. It was pouring rain. I'm not afraid to get wet. When I filmed, I wouldn't go out just because of, camera equipment, and, it cost a lot of money to destroy the camera and get it soaking wet. So I was shy away from it. But whenever I wouldn't film, I would go out and we would hunt regardless. So I stayed in bed that morning, and lo and behold, 7, and I got this down to the minute because I remember the details. 7:38 that morning, he walks up to that camera, and he was standing behind 3 or 4 does, and there was a wide 9-pointer I'd passed previously in September, and he would not come up to that camera. He would not come up to that corn. He stayed back, and he stayed just under those thick hollies, just where he could observe everything. It's just like that buck that years past he strolled in there like there was no care in the world. Now he's 5. He's coming in there. He will not put his nose in this corn pile. He will not get near it. He's just hanging out, checking does around it. And so I kicked myself in the butt, man. And my buddy's got one of my friends has an archery store, and they run this big deer contest every year, and it's a pretty good deer contest. You pay $100, and there's like a $5,000 first prize for biggest buck, and it only runs from like October the 30th till I think it's like November, maybe 20th or something like that. I might be botching that a little bit, but anyhow. I got this deer on camera, and I'm like, man, I know he's going to keep coming. I should enter that contest. So I called the guy up. I actually called the guy's brother, and I said, hey, man, this is the 29th. He was there that morning. Usually around here, if you get a picture of a deer during daylight in the morning, there's a pretty good chance he's going to show up daylight or close to daylight that evening because he's usually bedded nearby. And so I told the guy, I said, hey, man, what time does the contest entry close? And I'm, like, talking to this guy as I'm putting my hunting clothes on. And he's like, man, deadline 6 o'clock tonight. And I'm like, dude, it gets dark at 6 o'clock. I said, I can't make it.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, just come up after. We'll be here till like 6:30. And I said, dude, I'll be like getting back at the house at like 7. And
right.
He's like, and I said, well, just come up and enter, man. He's like, it's worth it if you got a big deer. And I was like, yeah, $5,000. Anybody's like to have $5,000. So
right, for sure.
I said, you know what? Yeah. I told him. I said, hey, look, the deer means more to me than the money. I'm going hunting tonight because I know if I leave and I go enter this contest, I'm going to end up regretting it. So I didn't go. I opted to go hunting that night. I got some new neighbors that actually have a field that butts up to the front of my woods, and they are motocross enthusiasts. And all night long, it was just the ripping. It sounded like somebody was running a 2-stroke chainsaw underneath my deer stand all evening.
I got a property like that too. Yeah.
Hardly saw a deer. I mean, I was, you get so much anger built up inside just because, you're out here trying to do this thing you love and they're doing the thing they love, but you're just like, you don't want them to do the thing they love because you want to be successful at what you do. So I was just, I get out of the woods and I call and they're like, no, we're already gone from there. And my buddy, he called him. He lives right next to him. And he said, they're going to let me come over there and enter the contest. I said, well, put my name in. He goes, all right, I'll put your name in. And I said, I'll bring you the money, tomorrow or whatever. I said, put my name in and, this will work out. And he said, all right. Well, my wife was supposed to go to the hospital to have a medical procedure done the next morning. We had to be there at 8 a.m., and they told us that she probably wouldn't get discharged till around 11. Well, we started to get more rain, and it was getting cold again. And I looked at my wife, and I was like, how much do you love me? And she's like, why? I was like, I got to be in that deer stand tomorrow morning. And she's like, no. I said, no, you've got to take me over to the hospital. I got to get this. I was like, I'll be there when you get out. I was like, please just let me go. And my wife's really good. She loves to hunt. She knew that if I went and I was sitting in that waiting room and I was getting pictures of this deer, that I would probably be the hardest person to live with for the rest of the year. So she tells me, she says, go ahead, go hunt this deer. She said, I know how much it means to you, and I don't want to live with the mean you, because she said, I know you'll be upset if he shows up on camera. So, I head out, I get in there, and, it's literally a 15-minute walk from my back porch. I get in there an hour before light. There's a lot of deer that funnel from the fields down through this creek. They follow the creek down up onto this hill, and what they do is they come in and they'll grab a bite to eat before they go and bed up for the day. And so I got in the stand, I climbed in the stand. It was just pouring rain, gusts of 25 miles an hour. I had several does come in, 7 or 8 deer were on the actual corn pile, had deer milling around, eating on underbrush all around me. I mean, I'm just sitting there, man. You sit there stiff-armed to your body. The wind's blowing. You're getting soaked in rain. And I happened to look in the direction I walked in from. If something caught my eye, I mean, it's blowing. You can't hear anything. It's raining. And 12 yards from my stands this buck under the holly. And I was like, oh, man. I almost jumped out of the tree. I immediately cut my eyes to check on my does to make sure they weren't, looking my direction or anything. And I reached around and I grabbed my bow. And he walks up and he ends up getting to about where he's going to be 25 yards when he pops out of these thick hollies. And I figure, there's does there. It's raining. There's wind cover. He's not going to be as cautious today as, he feels like nobody's going to be out here. I mean, that's usually when we get a lot of rain, there's a lot of bucks on their feet. And I think it's got a lot to do with hunter participation drops off dramatically around here when we get bad weather. So a lot of fair weather hunters. So he comes up just to where I'm about to, I've got tension on the string. I've got my feet set just right. I'm ready. This is about to happen. I usually don't get shaking or you say buck fever until after, I shoot. I'm usually pretty stone cold up to that point, so I wasn't nervous. And the deer would not come out. He literally had to walk 15 yards, and he would have been to those does. He backed off and circled and went 100 yards through the thickest brush on my hilltop, down the edge of the pine thicket, in between the pine thicket and all the hollies. And he broke cover maybe twice as he passed through an opening. He knew where he was going to travel, where he was safe. He was playing it safe. And I ranged him once at 40 yards. I drew back. He was crossing an opening. I give him the old mant. I mamped to him 2 or 3 times. Wind's blowing, it's raining. He didn't stop. I weren't going to take a walking shot. So this setup that I'm hunting is by design, to where I left a point of hollies coming off of the thick pine thicket out into the open woods, and at the end of that thick holly run is where I bait. So those deer will travel that point from out of the thickets. So they consider it, they're in cover because they've got this canopy of thick hollies around them, and it gives them that, feeling of security. Well, he literally cuts across the end of an opening and goes straight into the base of that finger and comes up that finger and stands just under the edge of that canopy where I can't shoot him. And he's literally at 25 yards again.
No kidding.
He ends up pushing a little buck off, and the does they're running in, they're doing their little half moon circles, running from him and hooking back, and he's just walking around like he knows that he's the man. And he goes over to a scrape. I can see him through the branches. He works a scrape, and he turns around. He goes behind this real thick holly tree that's real low to the ground, and he disappears. And all the does are scattered. They're 360 degrees around me. He is basically straight upwind of me at this point. And I'd say a good 5 minutes go by, and the only deer that's in the open woods is a spike. And he's staring back up into that finger of dense cover. And I was like, he's still here. He's still here. I was ready. I started popping ranges on trees. I knew most of the ranges around there, but I was just double checking my ranges. And 5 minutes go by and nothing. The does have calmed down. Not a glimpse of him through a tree branch, nothing. I was like, he's gone. I've missed my opportunity. I blew it. I was like, man, he's smart. Out the corner of my eye, I look, and I catch him coming from behind this thick holly. He starts quartering away, and I just ranged this pine tree at 43 yards. I literally had about 20 yards in front of me a big white oak that split about 15 feet up in the air into two main trunks of the tree. He stopped right in the middle of that, and that was my only opportunity. I didn't have any other shots on the angle he was walking. He was going to be gone. And he took off walking. His head come in between that gap. His shoulders got in that gap, and I let out the loudest mamp I've ever let out in the woods. And he stopped, and he just literally swung his head around, looked back my direction. I had my pin lined up, everything. I just touched the release, and the arrow flew just as true as you'd ever want to see it fly, and I struck him what looked to be dead behind the shoulder. And he takes off running. Now, normally I'm jumping up and down, and I'm just pumped because I know I drilled this deer. But something was different this time. I hit him perfect behind the shoulder. But when he took off running, it looked like my entire shaft was sticking out of this deer. It almost looked like I'd hit him in the point of the shoulder in that hard bone. And my heart sank. Man, I was like, oh my, I can't believe it. I just clipped his shoulder and I didn't get any penetration. I sat there for the next 30 minutes in the pouring rain, going over the shot, thinking about what just happened. You know, this is probably the biggest bow buck that I've ever had the opportunity to hunt. I mean, I've had opportunity to hunt bigger deer, but this is the biggest deer that I've ever let an arrow go on here. Right, and I've got an arrow in it. So, man, I'm just like, man, please. I was saying prayers. I was doing everything. And I calmed down, and, the bow hunter came back out. And I'm just like, all right, when he took off running, the arrow was not flopping up and down. If it was stuck in the point of the shoulder or it hit him in the point of the shoulder, it would have been going crazy as he ran off.
Right.
It stayed in it stayed in a true line as he ran. You know how that knot, you watch that knot go through the wood.
All right, guys, that will conclude part one of this two-part series with Danny Calloway, and we'll catch up with the rest of this hunt and the next one on part two. Hopefully you guys are looking forward to it. A lot more great information on the way. And as always, if you get a chance, make sure you check out the Huntstand app, download today, upgrade to the Pro version, and use the code TakeAim10. Happy New Year's.